One of the things to do for winter storage would be to remove this battery from this battery box right here. You don't want to let that set in a hanger all winter with no charger on it. You want to put a float charger on there, something that just keeps the battery a little bit active and keeps it up to snuff. Another thing I do is I would make sure this valve is shut off and run the engine. Make sure this valve is shut off and run the engine until it quits. Just let it suck all the gasoline out of the carburetors, because that can make a lot of goo in the carburetors. This is the main fuel shutoff valve. It's located right behind this fuel pump right here that transfers the fuel. The other thing you can do is turn the prop until it's in a position where this yellow line is lined up with this hole. That puts both pistons even. It closes the transfer ports. That closes the transfer ports, and this is to prevent so much oil running down into the head, because this is an inverted engine. It's running upside down. If you're going to have a damp hanger or something, I'd put a plastic bag over top of this air filter for winter storage, especially if it's going to be in there longer than 6 months. I would for sure put plastic over that, because air can go in and out of these carburetors. For winter storage, I would also spray WD-40 on this muffler and exhaust system. Just spray it on there and let it set. You don't have to wipe it off or anything like that. You don't have to worry about it. But it will tend to prevent rust from coming through this paint that's on here. The paint usually is good for, oh, maybe 3-4 years if you put WD-40 on it when it's in storage. But periodically you do have to blast the exhaust system and then repaint it to keep it looking halfway decent. There's another fuel valve hanging on the end of this hose here, and it's stuffed up inside of one of the wings, which you can pull down. And you pull it down and let it drain the fuel through a hose. Put a hose on there and drain it out through the rear passenger door into a can, if you want to drain the fuel tanks. But you don't necessarily have to do that for winter storage. I do it just so if there's a fire at the hangar, I can say, well, my plane didn't have any fuel in it. I think I showed this before, but this valve right here has a tube that goes down below the seconite on the bottom of the plane, and if you open this valve, it'll drain all your coolant out of the system. Somebody did want me to discuss the cooling system on here, so I'll go over it briefly one more time. There's a video on YouTube somewhere, an early video I think I did, where I was discussing how this cooling system works. Probably one of the ones where I was rebuilding the engine or something. This right here is the coolant expansion tank. When the coolant gets hot, it's going to expand. You need to have a tank for the coolant to go into. So this expansion tank, or header tank, whatever you want to call it, it has antifreeze in it, which you can check every time you fly it. When you pull the plane out of the hangar, you can just look at this sight gauge and you can see that coolant in the gauge. And here's the red line. Just make sure you got coolant just slightly above that red line. You don't want to fill this completely up, because when it expands, the coolant's going to go out of this tank, and you're just going to squirt it out this hose here, and it's going to go down here and come out underneath the airplane right there. That's that's where air goes into the tank too. When you drain the coolant, the air will go in there. This hose underneath the expansion tank, clamped on here, goes down and goes into a fitting right here into that lower radiator hose. When you fill this with coolant, the coolant's going to go down this hose into the radiator, which is a radiator from a Honda Civic. It will fill it from the bottom up and fill the radiator, go out this top hose, and it's going to have to go through. In here there's a thermostat. Now the thermostat has 2 holes drilled in it, and that's on purpose. The holes are there to allow some coolant and particularly air to go through it while you're filling the radiator. Even though the thermostat's closed, the coolant can get in there. It takes a while to fill it. It's not something that goes fast because it's all going through this small hose here. It's probably only a 1/4 inch diameter on the inside. So you have to keep filling the expansion tank there maybe several times to get this thing full. I'd say it holds about a gallon of coolant. And the coolant, once it goes through this thermostat, is going to fill this engine from the bottom up until it covers the water pump. The water pump is here. When it gets full to this point, particularly when the engine is running, there's coolant that's going to come up through this small holes. It's a very small hose, and it gets any bubbles or air that's in that cooling system is going to come out through this hose and go up into this expansion tank here. That's the purpose of this. So when it's running, it's going to be peeing a little bit of coolant in this tank all the time. And that's to sort of an air separator, make sure there's no air in the coolant. Because of the way this cooling system works, you never ever take off this pressure cap right here. Because if you did, the coolant would just drain completely out of the engine. It wouldn't drain out of the radiator, but everything above that's going to lose its coolant almost instantly, and it's going to be a big mess. So never take this cap off. This is the sensor that's measuring coolant temperature. It's a pressure switch. I believe it came out of a Chrysler of some sort. Just try different ones at the auto store is what I did, and it screws into the head. And what will happen is if the coolant in the head gets up to just about 200 degrees, it will turn on a red light on the panel in the front. That's an overheat light. It's to warn you that, hey, it's getting too hot in there. It's never gone on. It's never used it, never saw it work. But I tested it in a pan of water on the stove. That's why I know exactly what temperature it's going to turn on the light. It's just drilled and tapped into the cylinder head here. This hose here on the head, as well as this one, take hot water off the head, and it goes down this hose and goes to here in this white tubing, which is kind of straight PVC tubing. It runs up along the side of the body of the plane up to the heater under the front seat, and then the other piece of PVC you see down there, that's the one that's the return line and brings it back. And then the heat comes back, the hot water comes back up here and back into this hose where it goes through the water pump. So you got circulation of water on that thing through the heater all the time. I don't have a valve to shut it off. It doesn't hurt anything in the summer. It's just extra cooling capacity. The principle of operation of this cooling system is that this propeller is right behind this great big radiator here. There's plenty of air gets drawn through there. Even though this is kind of blocked by the fuselage, it's going to suck plenty of air through here. That's why it doesn't overheat when you're on the ground or in the air, because this propeller's turning here. It's drawing air right through there. So overheating really isn't a problem. The principal operation is that there's no pressure in this system. There is no pressure cap. Because it has no pressure cap, I don't have to worry so much about getting a pinhole leak, a leaking hose or fitting or something like that, where if the engine was in front of me, I might see coolant on the windshield or something. On this thing is mounted behind me, I can't see it at all. So most people when they're in school, although I don't think they teach this anymore, but they know that the boiling point of water is 212 degrees at sea level. That means the atmospheric pressure is sea level. This thing's not pressurized, so therefore you can't get this water hotter than 212 degrees. If you did, it would turn to steam, and if it was steam, it would go out that vent. So you can't get it hotter than that. That's the most you could get at sea level. Now as you increase in altitude, that temperature goes down. It might go down to, I don't know, 200 degrees or something if you're up 3,000 feet or something. But you'd have to check on the internet to get the real figures. But the principle is that you can't get this water any hotter than 212 degrees because there's no pressure. The way this cooling system works, it's just like a tea kettle. Heating water on the stove in a tea kettle. It just heats up. If it got hot enough or tried to get over 212 degrees, your tea kettle will whistle. This thing would just let steam go out through that little vent, and it would vent underneath the plane. The engine can't get hotter than 212 degrees unless there's no water in it. It would stay at that temperature as long as there's coolant in there until it boils all that off. It can't get hotter than 212 degrees. Prestone concentrate, it's not antifreeze and coolant mixed, or I mean antifreeze and water mixed. It's just the antifreeze coolant, ethylene glycol is what this is. It's not mixed with water. And I run straight antifreeze in there because the boiling point is 276 degrees Fahrenheit with this in there. So you got to at least get it that hot before it would make any steam. So by using straight coolant, you've raised the possible engine temperature to 276 degrees before you'd start even losing any coolant. So that's how I run it. There is no pressure. It doesn't really use any coolant. In a whole season, you won't see the coolant go down in that expansion tank very much. It doesn't really go down. I don't think you could put even a cup of coolant in that expansion tank. It just stays up all the time. So it's not something you have to worry about adding coolant or water to. If you do see it's down, just add the Prestone or some other kind of antifreeze in there. Put antifreeze in there, but no water. Don't put water in there because that will lower the point that it boils at, and you want it higher than 212 even. So I could fly this thing, I'm sure, to probably 10,000 feet without any problem or even having to worry about losing any coolant. Be an interesting experiment to try that sometime. See if any coolant boils in there. But I've never had this plane to 10,000 feet. I haven't done that.